If you're an animation fan, you've heard this story before. The CEO of Disney, Jeffrey Katzenberg, was forced out of his position in 1994 and went on to form Dreamworks Animation, whose feature film debut was only the second fully CGI movie ever made, Antz. However, Disney cried foul as they claimed Katzenberg was aware of Pixar's plans to make A Bug's Life once Toy Story was released, and accused him of stealing the idea out of spite, which he very much denied. They even attempted to sue DreamWorks over this, but in the end, both movies were a huge hit with critics and audiences, with Antz getting slightly better reviews, while A Bug's Life made slightly more money. Now, the funniest part about all of this is, even though both movies outwardly appear the same, having a male ant disrupt the status quo when desiring the hand of the colony's princess, they're actually very different in plot, and arguably even have the exact opposite message. And with that being said, today what I want to explore is if the critics were right to say that Ants was the better movie over A Bug's Life, or if the two movies are just too different to actually compare to each other. And obviously, there will be spoilers for both movies ahead, so if you don't want anything ruined, you should probably turn off the video. You have been warned. Alright, so to try and answer that question, let's first look at where both movies stand within their respective companies. Now, A Bug's Life is considered one of Pixar's weakest efforts, which can come down to many factors, be it that it was only Pixar's second movie, or pressure from Disney to reduplicate the success of Toy Story, or any number of other things. Antz, however, is considered about middle tier among DreamWorks efforts, not being considered one of their best, but nowhere near their worst either. And keeping that, as well as how the critics felt, in mind, I do think that Ants might have actually been the better movie, but not for the reason you might suspect. Now, if we're talking strictly from a visual standpoint, A Bug's Life is the better movie hands down. It's a lot more colorful, and its designs for the characters are much more visually appealing. But as I've said in many other videos, there's a lot more to a movie than just its visuals. Now, if we're talking only about which one would appeal more to adults, then Ants would definitely be the better movie because it barely avoided a PG-13 rating and may even appeal more to them than to children. But don't even get me started on that argument again. In actuality, the thing about both movies that might just make Ants the better one lies in its characters. Because while not discussed much at the time, A Bug's Life has gotten some flank for the fact that most of the good characters end up accidentally coming across as unsympathetic because of their actions. And this isn't too hard to see when you really look at it. Flick just wants to help the colony better themselves and protect them from the grasshoppers. And while some of what he did accidentally causes some problems, some people feel that instead of sending him on a wild goose chase, they maybe should have sat back and listened to the very reasonable arguments he was trying to make. But where this really bothers these people is that after the circus bugs are revealed to be just that and not the warriors Flick claimed they were, they angrily yell at him and banish him instead of admitting that his ruse actually did inspire confidence in them to stand up to Hopper and that he might have actually been right all along. Especially when they had sent him to find warriors just as an excuse to get rid of him in the first place. It's like, when you really look at it, some feel that Flick would have been totally justified in not going back to help them after the way they treated him. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong to believe that. And then there's the almost universally hated PT Flea. He's rude, obnoxious, unlikable, screws up everything every time he shows up, and is blatantly exploitative of every situation he finds himself in. I mean, he's supposed to be funny, but I think many find him to be way too mean-spirited to come across as genuinely humorous. And all I can really say there is, I just feel so sorry for John Ratzenberger, because not only did he obviously give the role everything he had, but he actually said that he was his favorite out of all the Pixar characters he's voiced. I guess he just saw the humor of the character better in the recording room than the way it was ultimately presented on screen. Really? Other than Flick and some of the other circus characters, I feel the only character they really nailed was Hopper himself. He's a perfect villain because he's a tyrant simply because he wants somebody to dominate over. Honestly, his famous scene with the grain and subsequent speech might just be the most famous scene in the movie, and I have no problem seeing why, because it might just be the most well-written one at that. It easily shows you in one fell swoop just how horrible, despicable, and petty he really is. He'll do anything just to keep his power over others, basically because he just wants to have somebody to bully and take everything from without consequence. I mean, he might just be one of the most loathsome Pixar villains ever created. And if you ask me, they did a fantastic job of making the audience hate him and conveying that all he cares about is his power over the ants. But on the whole, I can see where people are coming from when they say that half the characters that are supposed to be likable end up coming across as unsympathetic jerks. But let's contrast this with Antz. Now, I don't think I've ever heard a single complaint about any of the characters being accidentally sympathetic or unsympathetic. Really? I could list everybody, but I honestly think that would take way too long. All I'm going to say is, if the writers want you to like or dislike a character, they do an excellent job of making sure you feel that way. They even managed to make you feel sorry for a wasp that was just acting very condescending because she gets swatted by a fly swatter, as well as her husband, who ultimately survives to mourn her. You feel for him. In interviews, the writers even said it was their mission to keep Princess Bala from coming across as too bratty or entitled, and even credited Sharon Stone with helping to achieve this effect. And the same goes for Christopher Walken as well, because the writers were so impressed with his performance that they actually wrote in his character's redemption, as originally he was supposed to remain a bad guy, and it still works perfectly. Especially because it ends up showing a great contrast between a loyal soldier who can get ruthless when he has to, but on the whole is still a man of his morals, and a completely insane megalomaniac who thinks that everything is about him and that his way is the most efficient way to run the colony, no matter how much evidence there is to the contrary, to the point that if anybody thinks differently, then they must die. And again, all the other characters, good or bad, end up coming across exactly how they're supposed to. There isn't a single characterization that doesn't fill the role that the writers intended them to. Alright, so to sum it up, I feel that some might believe that Antz is a superior movie to A Bug's Life because it handles its characters better. Now keep in mind that this is a very subjective conclusion, as which one you believe to be better depends entirely on how well you feel A Bug's Life handled its characters. Because if you believe they did them just fine, which you are most certainly free to, then you'll have a very different standpoint on it than the one I've just presented. But as somebody trying to look at this as objectively and impartially as possible, I might just have to say that Antz was the better written movie, at least in regards to the characters. Now again, I will freely admit I am no writing expert, but as somebody who's written books in the past, I can say with great certainty that one of the most important rules to storytelling is always to keep your good characters sympathetic and the evil ones unsympathetic, which I speak about at length in my Harry Potter video, which you can find a link in the description to. Now, of course, there are always exceptions to this, but on the whole, that is really an important rule to always follow. And if you ask me, in this case, the writers of Antz accomplished that better than the writers of A Bug's Life did. Okay, that's everything I wanted to say. So now I want to hear your opinions. Do you think Antz is better than A Bug's Life, or do you believe the Pixar one is the superior movie? And how much do you think the characterizations have to do with that? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And as always, you don't have to agree with my assessment here if you don't want to. You can feel any way you want to about both of these movies. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all your support, and I hope to see you all next time.